Good morning. It's Tuesday, October 26th, 2021. It is 9:01 a.m. I'll call the meeting of the Macomb County Apportionment Commission to order. Will Deputy Clerk Kathy Smith please take the roll call of the members?
Please respond by saying present or here.
Use the mic.
Anthony Forlini, Macomb County Clerk.
Here.
Larry Rocca, Macomb County Treasurer.
Here.
Peter Lucida, Macomb County Prosecutor.
Here.
Ed Brulee, Macomb County Democratic Party Chair.
Here.
Mark Fortin, Macomb County Republican Party Chair.
Here.
Thank you.
We'll move to the adoption of the agenda. Would someone like to make a motion
So
to approve the
moved.
agenda?
Second.
Motion by Larry Rocca, Macomb County Treasurer, supported by Peter Lucida, Macomb County Prosecutor.
Any discussion? All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Those opposed signify by saying nay. Motion passes. Move to public participation. Members of the public may speak for up to 3 minutes. If you wish to speak, please come forward to the podium and state your name. Is anyone interested in speaking? Anyone interested in speaking? No. We'll move on to the next agenda. Approval of the minutes for the September 22nd.
Move to approve the minutes, Rocca.
Second.
Motion by Larry Rocca, Macomb County Treasurer, supported by Peter Lucida, Macomb County Prosecutor.
Any discussion? All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? The ayes have it. Next item on the agenda is a discussion of the Planning Department's reviews of the plan submitted by Mr. Mark Fort and Mr. Ed Brulee. Jeff Schrader, I assume you're the one making the presentation. Come forward.
Yes.
Is your mic on?
It is now. Good morning, Commissioners. Before you guys this morning, you have 2 copies of our Department's Apportionment Plan Review. For purposes of this meeting, I'll be referring to the plans as the Brulee Plan and the Fortin Plan. And I'll be going through them just basically here in alphabetical order, so we'll talk about the Brulee Plan first. First and foremost, what I wanted to outline is the work that we did for you guys. This report is in 2 parts. The first part is the Planning and Economic Development Department's analysis of the plan, and the second portion of the report is the actual printed report that came out of the state county commissioner district apportionment tool. So basically, both plans were entered into the state tool. We ran the report from the state tool, looked at the results of that, and then with our analysis, we went back through and basically double-checked to make sure that the state's tool added up and basically did the analysis correctly. So with that, there are basically in this plan, there are, per statute, there are 4 measures of analysis. We're looking at the first being the contiguousness of the districts. We're also looking to see that the plan does not exceed the 11.9% variance in between the populations in the individual districts in the proposed plans. We're looking at the compactness of the districts, and there's a scoring system for that I'll explain. And then the last element of measure of analysis that we did was looking at the community and voting district splits that are introduced by each plan. So we're giving a total of those splits for you guys to consider. So both plans basically start out describing our methodology. We're pretty much calling out from the County Charters Act the measures that we're looking at, calling out where the 11.9% population variance for districts comes from. So if we look at the Brulee Plan, passes the validation for all 4 tests. All districts are contiguous within the Brulee Plan. There are no districts that are defined and then have another island portion that stands alone somewhere else in the county. So they're completely fall within one polygon. As far as the analysis of the population variance, the plan for all of the districts meets the 11.9% standard. There is a permitted variance, basically taking the largest district, the percentage variance of the largest district, subtracting that 11.9% to get the smallest, and that gives us the range. And this plan for each of these districts all fall within that range. It is important to note that when we look at the target district population of the county, based upon the state's CCD tool, the state provided a target population or a total population for Macomb County of 879,000 872 persons. Now, this varies from the complete 100% census count total for the county, and I want to bring this up because we talked to the state about this. The 100% total for the state is 881,217 individuals. The variance here is the state's choice to remove the state prison population in Lenox Township from the one voting block group area. So there are 1,345 people less in our analysis based upon the state's removal of them. Based upon the way both plans were submitted, this has no impact in terms of looking at that district size, because everybody included Lenox Township as a whole within their plans. But wanted to point that out, that there is a difference in the state's tools population based as opposed to what the 100% count for the census is. And as the state had indicated, it is the 1,345 individuals that were taken out for that state prison population. Moving on, the next measure that we looked at is the measure of compactness. That is, how tight is a district? Is a district very large and sprawling, or is it as close and contained as possible? This uses a measure that came out of the state tools called the Polsby-Popper test. And basically, we got the formula here for you. You're looking at the area of a district, then divided by the perimeter of the district. So this gives a measurement that can be associated with each one of them. So within the Brulee plan, there is no ultimate. Within either plan, there is no ultimate measure of compactness or any threshold that we're trying to meet. These are just numbers for you to consider. So as I've noted here in the plan, District 4 in the Brulee plan comes out as the most compact of the districts. District 9 is the least compact. And I've called that out for the Fortin plan too, so you can kind of compare them side by side as you look at the maps and then look at the measures of compactness. And then the last analysis that we did is the analysis of splits. It indicates in the statute that when doing a reapportionment, the practice should be to try to reduce the number of communities that are split, the number of townships that are split, the number of villages, and the number of census voting districts that are split. There's no given measure for how many splits you should have or not have. The idea is to try to eliminate as many splits as possible, but while still able to meet that target population that's set for both districts, or for all the districts. Now, and I want to just go back and talk about that real quickly, because I just realized I glanced over that. With the state's plan, or with the state's total of 879,000, when we're dividing by 13 districts, the district target population that all these analyses are based on is 67,682 people. So when we look at the Brulee plan analysis, the Brulee plan only proposes 7 splits in their plan. There are 4 city splits where the city of Roseville is split between one or more districts, city of St. Clair Shores, city of Sterling Heights, and the city of Warren. We have 3 township splits included in that total of 7, those being Clinton, Macomb, and Shelby townships. The plan introduces no or proposes no village splits, nor does it propose any census voting district splits. And with the voting district splits, those census voting districts, as defined by the census, were pretty much a snapshot in time at the time when the census was taken of what the local voting precincts look like. So I think part of that analysis, or the reason they want to reduce the splits, is as you start splitting census voting districts, that does create a situation for the local clerks. They're going to have to go and re-precinct their districts. So more work, more splits ends up being more work for the locals. But again, that's up for you guys to decide on that analysis. So that is the Brulee plan in its entirety. The rest of the report is basically the output of the state tool. The state tool basically goes through and provides a list of district descriptions by community, and then then it's defined even smaller by the voting districts. So we'll have 13 districts all defined here by the tool. Then you'll see the state's tables of their population variance and the compactness, and you'll see that those numbers basically correlate with the same numbers that we came up with at the planning department. And then within the report then follows the county district map as proposed in the plan, and there's individual maps for each of the proposed districts. So that's the plan in its entirety. I don't know if there's any questions related to the Brulee plan before I move on to the Fortin plan.
Mr. Brulee?
Yeah, thank you. When would it be appropriate to ask a question, not about a particular plan, but about the methodology that the planning department used for counting splits?
Well, I think really up front, that way when we're going through these plans, we understand what their methodology is, so you can think about it through. So I would say right now is a fine time, so we can.
Okay. If we could have the gentleman describe the method that he has chosen to count splits in communities in particular, because I think he applied the same method to both plans, so there was an element of fairness that he described, but that choosing the way he might have picked it, there could be more splits counted. For example, in Clinton Township, under the Fortin plan, how many splits did you count for Clinton Township? Did you count that as one, or did you count that as the number of splits in the districts? Because then you would get a different number. Now, the application he used is been fair, I believe, to all plans, but depending upon your definition of that, which we should enter into the record, you would get more splits if you used a different definition, even though when applying it, it is fair to both.
That is correct, Mr. Brulee. The methodology that we used was a simple count. So if we saw a plan, if Clinton Township in one plan, or in both plans for that matter, because they were both measured the same, was technically split 3 times by 3, there were 3 districts defined. If it was split 3 times, we just counted splits once. So we looked at the community. What we did is we went through the state plan as we were reading through their definition. If it said Sterling Heights was split, we noted Sterling Heights. We did not count how many times Sterling Heights was split. So that is a good thing to note. So ours was a simple total, not a compounded total, as we figured that would be easier to comprehend and understand.
And I accept the gentleman's response, but I would just note that in court decisions in the past, they have counted all splits, which would increase the number of splits in the Fortin plan, but does not increase the number of splits in the Brulee plan. So I'm just saying there are more splits depending on how you count it than is reported under the way they did it, which has been fairly applied to both plans. I understand that, but there are different methodologies you could use.
Thank you, Mr. Lucido.
Thank you. And Jeff, thank you again for all your hard work on this and effort. You know, these splits, as Mr. Brulee has brought up, would it be something that when you look back at these plans, that you look at the cities, the townships, the villages, if those splits occurred within that community? So if you look at, let's say, as we've just indicated, Roseville, for instance, if there was a split or 2 in Roseville, are we looking at just 1 split for Roseville, or are we looking at 2 splits for Roseville when you start to add those splits up.
We totaled it as the community just being split once.
So Macomb County, if we just total the communities, and then we only have 4 splits on this plan and 6 splits on this plan, at the end, is there any weight to be given about any splits within? How many splits are within the municipality?
We did not account for the total splits within the communities. That analysis can be done, but I don't know that it would net anything different. I mean,
Okay.
you'll have a relative number, but you'll still be showing that
Doesn't
communities
make-
have been split by the plans.
Doesn't make the plan ineffective, doesn't make it more effective. It just means that there's more splits within a municipality, not just maybe one. And I understand how you counted it, and I understand how Mr. Brulee has indicated that there could be differentials that you can look at, but it's not making it any different. Does it make sense now, based on your statement there, that based on population of Macomb County pursuant to the census that is done on the 10-year, 879,000, 13 districts was both being used, so we didn't increase the districts in both of the maps. That, is there any, and it still comes down to 67,682, which we still have to get to, right?
Correct.
Okay. Mr. Chairman, thank you, I got an understanding.
And I think Mr. Brulee's point was well taken, that it was used in a court of law, so it's probably good to have that information. So when we're considering this, we know that.
Okay.
Mr. Bruley?
Mr. Chairman, what I would like to do is pass around to the members a Michigan Supreme Court case and the operative paragraph on splits, so that's in consideration. This has been the controlling feature of apportionment for, I don't know, 20 years or so. And just so that people are aware that these splits make a dramatic difference in this process, and so that I'll just give one
Thank you,
of
Mr.
these.
Bruley. Yeah, go ahead and pass it. We'll pass it
Yeah, how
across
you
here.
do this through this process, I'm not sure. Here, make sure, if anyone, Mike, here, I brought other copies for the audience also, so. Is there enough for everybody there? Yeah. And one for, I guess there was not enough, one for the clerk.
Okay.
Because I'd like to enter this in.
Okay, so thank you for that. Kathy's coming. Let's take this into consideration, but let's move on to the next plan.
All right,
I appreciate that, Mr. Bruley.
Mr. Chairman.
Mr. Rocca?
Yeah, I have a question for Jeff. The splits specifically refer to what? Can you categorize individual splits? Are they referred to precincts, cities, townships?
Yes, cities.
Specifically.
We're looking at cities, we're looking at townships, we're looking at villages, so those 3 levels
Those
of
are the 3.
municipalities. And then we're looking at the census voting districts. So those are the census voting districts being correlated with precincts.
Okay, thank you.
Mr. Bruley?
Yeah, this is a quote from the Supreme Court's decision, and it includes precincts, which are census voting districts. So that is something that we need to look at under these judgments of these plans.
Very good.
All right. Moving on to the Fortin plan. Again, this plan meets all of the standards, statute. All the districts are contiguous. The plan does meet the 11.9% standard for population variance. It does score. It has its compactness score. And when we look at the splits, there are many more splits that are introduced in the Fortin plan. Yet I would note that if I go back and just kind of give a comparison contrast with both plans are contiguous. Both plans meet the 11.9% standard. The overall variance between the districts is there's less population variance in the Fortin plan. The Fortin plan also has higher compactness scores than the Brulee plan. But when we look at the splits, the Brulee plan has less splits than the Fortin plan. The Fortin plan does split sorry, got the wrong one here. The Fortin plan, as we counted the splits, as a single instance of each one, the Fortin plan introduces 43 splits. We see we have 4 cities that are split. We have 4 townships that are split by this plan. None of the villages are split, but this plan does introduce 35 census voting district splits. And in the plan, you'll note the census voting districts and the communities in which they take place in. I think with any of these plans, as you're trying to balance out population, the way we are in Macomb County, you're going to either introduce splits and have a more compact and a more population balanced plan, or you're going to reduce splits and maybe not be as compact or have a larger variance between the districts. So in terms of our analysis of that, that again, that is up to you guys to take a look at as you're looking at the numbers here. But that is the information that we have on both of these for you this morning. Be happy to answer any other questions that you have.
I have a, I'm sorry, excuse me. I have a couple of questions, if I may.
Go ahead, Mr. Fortin.
Is it okay?
Go ahead.
When it comes to the variance from highest to lowest, could you give me the percentages of the 2 plans?
Certainly. The variance, if we look at
Just
the
before you do, if I can ask the members to maybe shut off the mics when you're done, because that way the speaker will come through clear. Just shut it off, and then when you're ready to speak, turn it back on.
If we look at the variance, the permitted plan variance for the Brulee plan, for the Fortin plan, was 0.722% to negative 11.268%. And that plan falls well within there. The actual plan, what I gave you the number was the permitted plan variance based upon the 11.99%. The actual plan variance is 7.22% to negative 1.46%. So those districts, those target populations and the total populations of the districts are very, very close in the Fortin plan. In the Brulee plan, again, we will have the same permissible variance of 11.99%. The permitted plan variance in the Brulee plan was 6.536 to negative 5.364. That's the permitted range. That plan falls in at 6.536 to negative 5.307. So there is more variance in the Brulee plan between the individual districts. The Fortin plan is more population balanced. The Brulee plan is less, but both fall within the acceptable parameters.
Thank you. Could you give me, you said that there's a number for the compactness of the districts.
Yes, the Polsby-Popper number has been calculated for both plans. If we look at the Fortin plan, we see that District 1 is the most compact, District 6 is the least compact. The way these numbers work is the closer you are to the number 0, you'll always, with this score, you'll always receive a number between 0 and 1. Closer you are to 0, the least compact. Closer you are to 1 is a measurement of being more compact. So when we look at the Fortin plan, we find that the average compactness of that plan is 0.544. The average compactness of the Brulee plan is 4.38, meaning that overall the Fortin plan is slightly more compact. We have a minimum and maximum range. If we look at the range for the Fortin plan, we're looking at 0.423 was the least compact district. 0.693 score was the most compact. We look at the Brulee plan, there's more variance there. We see that the least compact district in the Brulee plan was at 1.91, and that was district number 9. District number 4 comes in at being the most compact at 0.731. So I've also provided a standard deviation for those, which is, your distance from the average score from the distance. The standard deviation of the Fortin plan is 0.089. The standard deviation of the Brulee plan is 0.166. So that is the Brulee plan has a larger deviation from that standard average. So overall, based upon this analysis and these numbers, the Fortin plan would be considered to be slightly more compact than the Brulee plan.
Thank you. I have another question, if I may. I used the tool. The tool had down there, as it turns out, I believe it's called census blocks.
Correct.
Silly me, making an assumption of how the government works. I assumed that these blocks were precincts. That's right. Now, when I printed out the report, the pages aren't numbered, but after I think it's page 4, after a written description of each district, there is section 2, data and demographics. The data and demographics, there's nothing in there about splits. When I was doing this plan, my concern was simply what the voters were voting for. I did not look at current maps. I didn't look at anything. They voted 2 years ago because they wanted this new system whereby there were not gerrymandered, sprawling maps and all this kind of thing. That's what they voted for. And as anyone that looks at this thing, this mess, that is not what they got. So I decided that I was going to create a map as close as possible to the population of each district. I didn't look at current who's where, all this kind of nonsense. I wanted to give the voter, I thought somebody should stand up for what the voter wants. So I created a map whereby the populations were as close as possible and naturally compact as possible, which as you go south in Macomb with larger populations, that's more difficult. Now, there was nothing in the program that I saw, but I have to admit, I'm a novice. There's nothing in there I saw that said anything about splits. There's nothing in the reports that say anything about splits. I never learned about splits until after I submitted the plan. So I just wanted that clear for the record, that in the report itself, there's nothing in here about how many splits. Thank you for your work. I appreciate it.
Thank you. Do we have any other comments? Mr. Brulee?
Well, it's just that I understand the gentleman.
Ed, you want to turn your mic on?
Thank you. I understand the gentleman's stress at not knowing, but the fact is that county reapportionment is controlled by the Michigan Supreme Court. And that has been done in a similar way for a number of years now. It was mentioned at our last meeting about the 11.9%. The lawyer mentioned that whole issue at our last meeting for the county. And what the rules are, what we think of reapportionment as one person, one vote is a United States Supreme Court decision, not a Michigan Supreme Court decision. And as it says, this requires maximum preservation of township, village, city, and precinct line, and sets this 11.9%, which is what has been the judgment of the state Supreme Court when dealing with county reapportionment. And so that is the controlling factor, is not to make these kinds of splits that occurred, and the county counting the way it did, in fact, has less splits than you might get if you counted in a different way, and it would even make it a wider number. So, you know, those of us on the board have a responsibility to understand these when we do this process, and having it put onto a state process, which is legislative districts having different criteria, is not an excuse for not having met the state Supreme Court criteria. I understand the confusion, which is why I raised the question about that tool to begin with, using it for county reapportionment, which I didn't do because I knew of the problems inherent in it. And not knowing the difference between a precinct and a census voting district or block district is, our job is to know the difference. Thank you.
Thank you. Is there any other comments?
Mr. Chairman?
So, Mr. Rocco?
Yes, Jeffrey, precincts are known to be changed from time to time by the townships and by the cities and the villages. And in defense of Mr. Fortin, he was not made aware of splits specifically having anything to do with the reapportionment portion. According to what he did do, he made them more closer population-wise, which is what's required in the new apportion process with the new census data, which there was an increase in population. So his specific map is much closer to the apportionment for population as is required by the apportionment process.
So
Mr. Chairman.
if I can, real quick, what I'm hearing here is a little bit of what we talked about in the last meeting. Mr. Brulee brought up the idea that maybe we need to make, if there's issues that we need to resolve, that we have that ability to resolve them. And that's kind of what I'm hearing here, to make sure we have a map that's, at any level, makes some sense. Does it make some sense that we...
Mr. Chairman.
So I'm just saying to allow for that ability to make some changes if need be, so we don't run into those problems.
Well, with all due respect to our esteemed treasurer, the criteria is not going down to exact population numbers. That's not the criteria that county reapportionment is based on. It's based on the decisions of the Michigan Supreme Court and what they said are viable alternatives. And ignorance of the law is not an ability to change criteria. If you go out and you're involved in a traffic mishap and you make a turn in an improper way, causing an accident, that's not a defense. I appreciate the consternation that it can cause, and I'm not suggesting any ill will or anything else, but it is not the controlling factor. And I just point that out because we can make whatever decision we want here, but the courts have declared what the process is for county reapportionment.
Mr. Lucido?
Thank you. There's controlling factors, as Mr. Brulee's indicated. That's been already discussed by Mr. Schroeder up here. Those would be those 4 items that you have stated. Continuous 11.9% variance, compactness, and community and voting districts. Now, if I'm not following those 4, on the Fortin plan, his had, as you've indicated, you've looked at it and said, these factors are better for these reasons. On the Brulee plan, he keeps focusing on the splits, I guess, only. It's not saying that the Fortin plan splits did anything different, and it still complies with the 4 measures, regardless of what Mr. Brulee offered on the Supreme Court, indicating something about, nothing about splits in there. It's just maximum preservation. We can sit here and debate the law, but the rule here is the 4 measures are the controlling factors in getting down to a plan. Now, with all due respect to the submitters, I have a solution, I think. I think we are in no hurry that I see here to finalize the plan today, Mr. Chairman. I don't see it. In fact, we have another meeting scheduled for November 3rd at 10:30. 2, if we were in a hurry, then we'd have to beat it out all day long. I don't believe that that's in the best interest. We are trying to simulate what it is that makes sense here for this county based on the census, based on the number of districts, as well as takes into consideration keeping things uniform. That being said, I'm going to make a motion to send these maps back to these individuals based on the statements that were made by Mr. Schroeder in the planning, and let them give them an opportunity to make any amendments to their own map and return them by Friday, October 29th. It still gives us enough time.
Second, Rocca.
Oh, hang on, are you done with the motion?
Pretty much. I mean, look, here's the thing. We can debate this issue all day long. It doesn't serve us any purpose. What serves the purpose is if the person, or persons in this case, submits the maps, why not give them a chance to go ahead, based on the statements made by Mr. Schroeder, to fix, repair, make it better? Maybe they can call each other and talk about things.
Okay, let me just, we got a motion by Mr. Lucido and a second by Mr. Rocca. Is there any discussion?
Yes,
Go
I'd like
ahead.
to discuss it, if I may.
I'll let the gentleman go before me.
May I ask how many precincts are in Macomb County?
I would have to, I do not have that number available. It's a lot.
I see with this
We might have that
conversa-
answer. Do we have that answer?
343.
343.
Thank you. Thank you. This discussion, to me, is largely a red herring. We're talking about inconvenience to local officials. We're not talking about things, there's nothing in the Supreme Court thing that, to me, means anything. I'm sorry. It says, yes, that you try to set the lines and you try to do certain things. There's no ruling there that you must, that there has to be a percentage, just like there is in population. There's a percentage, right? 11.99, right? Okay. There's nothing in there about the percentage of precincts in a county that have to be, you can't go beyond that. To me, it's all a big red herring. If the committee wants to postpone it, that's perfectly fine with me, but I think that it's just an argument for the sake of argument. Thank you.
Mr. Brulee, you have a question?
I appreciate the quagmire that the gentleman finds himself in. But we set a date for submission. I readily would agree to, if someone made, and we said, and I made the comment, if someone made a mistake, a small mistake here or there, we should give each other way on fixing that. This is not a small mistake. This is what the state Supreme Court has said is determinate over decades. Because the gentleman did not follow the law, we should not allow him to go back and do a new map when we set the date for when submission by the maker of the motion's own motion, I think it was, to submit those dates as to when we had to have it in. And so I would oppose that motion, and I would move as a substitute motion that we approve the plan that has the least number of breaks.
Thank you. Mr. Lucido?
Thank you. Apparently, Mr. Brulee has brought the law by way of a citation and not the full extent of the law as it relates to what we're supposed to measure today, and that is the controlling factors. I don't want to be wrong on how to do what is necessary to do, and I don't want to rush to justice and say that the motion maker who said submission of a plan, if there is a deadline today, then somebody must show me that. Otherwise, putting in a plan is one thing. Perfecting the plan for the benefit of the voters of this county is what it's about. That's why this committee's here today. In addition, I see no downside giving both plan makers and submitters the opportunity to exhaust everything they can to make it the way they feel it should be made based on your statements today. And Mr. Chairman, I respectfully wished my motion and second to be voted on.
Is there any other discussion?
Well, first you have
Mr.
to
Rowe.
ask for whether there's a second to my motion. I assume there won't be, but we should clarify that matter first, because I made a motion in the nature of a substitute to approve the plan with the least number of breaks. And we need to clarify that before going to the motion that the gentleman made. And like I said, I don't expect there to be any, but I think you should clarify if there is.
So I guess maybe, Mr. Rocker, you're a parliamentarian. Is that something we vote on that? Was there a second for that? Is that what you're?
Well,
we have to ask for a
I'm
second
just
of that?
asking, you should call for a second.
Is there a
And there
second
may
to
or
Mr.
may
Brulee's
not be
motion?
one, but
Is there a
I
second?
wanted in the record that there was,
I understand. Is there a second to Mr. Brulee's motion of approving the plan with the least amount of splits? I hear none.
thank you.
Motion fails. I'm glad I got Larry here next to me, a parliamentarian. All right. Is there any other comments on the motion that was made by Mr. Lucido?
Mr. Chairman, if I may renew the
go ahead.
motion, because I want to make sure everybody understands it. The motion is to send the maps that we receive back to their submitters to give them the opportunity to make any amendments and corrections based on the statements that were made today by Jeff Schroeder, and return them by Friday, October 29th at 4:00 p.m.
Okay. Any other discussion?
Discussion on the motion, please.
Just a question.
Discussion.
Your last
He just
statement-
restated the motion.
Your
Yeah,
last
this
statement
discussion I would like.
Yeah.
about when
Let
they're
me-
to be in.
I'm sorry?
The last part of your statement, please. I didn't catch it. About when they're to be, you're talking about the 3rd of November?
We don't meet again until the 3rd of November, according to what we had proposed last time by way of agenda at 10:30 a.m. And any amendments or corrections would be returned by Friday, October 29th. That would be this Friday at 4:00 p.m.
Would you be open to a friendly amendment to make it Monday? Because I'm leaving out of town.
I have no objection on that change to make it then Monday, and I'll have to look at the date for purposes of the record.
I think that's the first.
Thank you, Madam Clerk. November 1st, 2021 at 4:00 p.m.
Mr. Rocca, do you
I second that.
say, okay. Any other discussion? Mr. Brulee?
Well, I think that this motion should be seen for what it is. As a move to allow a partisan effort to now fix what was done incorrectly by the gentleman. There is no need. We were all supposed to submit maps according to the law by the October 8th deadline, 2 weeks to fix it. Now the gentleman has submitted a map that is incorrect. He was not understanding the process. He had the ability to go to a lawyer if he needed to. He had the ability to call on any number of people to submit a plan which would be, in fact, correct. He did not. So now, since his map is improper, we're now extending the deadline so that he can go back and do what he should have done. This is a partisan effort trying to get a gerrymandered map in. And it is not appropriate under the rules that the commission set itself. This is not a small fix. The gentleman has suggested in his comments this morning, he really didn't know what he was doing. Now he understands. That is not the way the process should work. And I want that a part of the record. Thank you.
Thank you.
Mr. Chairman,
I saw a reflection with your hand up. Go ahead.
I want to make it very clear that there is nothing illegal about my map. There's nothing illegal about splits. Just because I misunderstood what those little tiny little things were that I thought were precincts are actually census blocks makes no difference whatsoever to the legality of the map that I put in. It meets every criteria. There's nothing in the criteria that mentions the number of splits. So I stand with my map. I'm voting no for this week extension because I like my map. I think it meets the criteria. It meets what the voters voted for. I did not even look to see what the current map looked like and who was in what district. I did what the voters of this state and this county voted for with this ridiculous plan that we have in the state. Wait till you see the maps that the state produces. This map is contiguous. It meets all the criteria, and it is not unlawful. And I knew what I was doing when I did it. I just want that very clear in the record. Thank you very much.
Mr. Chair.
Mr. Brulee, go ahead.
I don't want to cast any aspersions on the gentleman's sincerity. I believe he made a sincere effort. So, number one, I cast no aspersions on your sincerity for the submitted document, number one. Number two, if in fact, as the gentleman stated, he lives by submitting, I would ask him to, I don't think it's illegal of what the gentleman, I'm not suggesting at all that the submitted document is somehow illegal. I'm just saying it doesn't fit the criteria. And if the gentleman believes in his map, let him submit it again and make no changes, and let's go forward to vote on these things, and then let other jurisdictions decide what is correct and what isn't. I think that's the way to handle it. We're going to have a split decision here anyway, so fine, let it be. We have two maps. Gentleman's fine with his map, I'm fine with mine. Let's go forward, let's make whatever motions is going to happen, and then let's go to the next part of the process.
One
Can I
last,
take a final comment? Go ahead.
if you decide to wait till Monday, I'm going to work at straightening out the bordering precincts that are split. Otherwise, it'll be the same map, but we will straighten out as many of the precincts as I can. In fact, I can't see why I can't do all of them. It'll still be contiguous. The populations will still be well under the 11.9. So if you guys decide to do that, it's perfectly fine with me.
All right, I think we've discussed this pretty well. There was a motion by Mr. Lucido, second by Mr. Rocca. Will the clerk please take the roll?
Anthony Forlini, Macomb County Clerk.
Yes.
Larry Rocca, Macomb County Treasurer.
Yes.
Peter Lucido, Macomb County Prosecutor.
Yes.
Ed Brulee, Macomb County Democratic Chair.
No.
Mark Fortin, Macomb County Republican Party Chair.
No?
Okay. The ayes have it. Next item on the agenda is unfinished business. Is there any unfinished business?
Mr. Chairman?
Yep.
The new date to reconvene the committee, is that still going to take place on November 3rd at,
Mr. Lucio, that's a good point. Is that, was that a Tuesday or Wednesday?
it's actually a Wednesday. It's at 10:30
I
we
guess-
have, I mean, it's up to you, Mr. Chairman.
Well, I
and
guess
rest
the
of
question goes to
committee.
Mr. Schrader. Is that enough time for you to take a look at the submitted plan?
Yes, that would.
It shouldn't be much of a change. Yeah, okay.
Thank you.
If there is any changes. Any other unfinished business? Any new business? Is there any new business in front of us? No? Move to public participation. Members of the public may speak for up to 3 minutes. If you wish to speak, please come up to the podium and state your name. Anybody? You got somebody. Welcome. If you could hit the speaker button on the mic. There you go.
Russell Holtlander. I had the same things. Everything, both maps met all the criteria legally. The one doesn't actually have a criteria with the splits, but at least in this process right here that you would be voting on today, I noticed the community splits. I think the township was the only difference of one extra, and I believe that's my township, Clinton. And one of the concerns that I have is you took my township, which is basically 1.5 districts, and you split it up into 3. And one of the things that is concerning is the idea of splitting these communities, basically weakening, instead of, we don't have any community. At that point, we have 3, where we're about half of a, if you take 100,000 divided by 3, it's about half of a district. We don't have any district that is just 100% Clinton Township if you split it into 3, I don't think. Obviously, depending on how that split is, I haven't seen the map, but it dilutes the power of a community. The same thing with the precincts, which I understand you thought were census blocks. When you split a community precinct, you have neighbors right next to each other who aren't able to vote for the same person to represent that precinct. I think that is kind of important. Obviously, it's a matter of you weighing what criteria is the most important. And since there's nothing that was in violation, you have to measure how much like each one is. But for me, splitting up communities or precincts is the big number here. I'm a little upset about my own community being split up, but it's the only one that's split up extra by community. But the most alarming thing today is that you openly admitted you didn't know what you were doing. Everybody's trying to be like, okay, it's your first time, I guess. But it's a job, and you failed at it. And now you're looking around and thinking, wow, I made a mess. And you're like, oh, I'm really proud of my map. But you get your 3 Republican friends to vote to make it, let's give him a mulligan and he's going to have a week to fix it. And your response was, well, I'll fix all the precincts. So there's going to be one extra, which you're protesting that you don't need to do it. You're proud of your map. If you're really proud of your map, you'd put the same map in on November 1st. But you're not. You had it pointed out to you that you screwed up huge. And your friends are going to give you the chance to fix it. And I think that's, the number one thing was all this stuff with apportionment that's happened in the last few years was because all these precincts are split up and communities were split up. That was the number one problem. But I think it's kind of disgusting to see the idea that you would look around and go, oh, well, we were incompetent, so now we're going to give ourselves a second chance. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Any other public comments? Any other public comments? All right, the last item on the agenda is adjournment. Would somebody like to make the motion to adjourn?
Mr. Chairman,
Yep, Mr. Rocca.
I'd like to ask if we could call up Mr. Creasha to speak for a moment regarding the plans prior to adjournment, if that's possible. Frank Creasha, the corporate counsel.
Okay, all right, well, that was part of new business, I suppose, but go ahead. Mr. Creasha?
Good morning. I thought I was going to get out of here, but Larry, thanks. I have looked at the plans, and I think I've heard a lot of comments about court discussion, and I'm familiar with some of the cases they decided. But if you look at redistricting maps lately, the primary factor that courts look at is the population variance, in my opinion. The population variance on one plan was 11.8%. The population on another plan was below 2%. I don't recall ever seeing a plan below 2%. So the courts are going to balance these factors. They're going to look at it. Now, it's true that the legislation says you look at splits. You look at splits in the communities and you look at splits in precincts. It's right in the statute. And it says you only split if necessary to meet the population standard. That's the standard that they use in the statute. And that's MCL 46.404 paragraph F, and there's the communities are like D and E. So, but you have to look at it this way. If I create a plan that is close to the 11.9% variance, does that give me the license to split communities? I think that's what a court will look at. So the court's going to balance this out and say, one person looked at some factors, and out of the 4 factors, came out on top on 3. Another person looked at another factor, at a different way of looking at it, and came out on 1. But that doesn't mean, now we first heard about these precinct splits today at the meeting. I think it's rational for what the board did. Let's look at it. Let's now look at the statute, and let's see if we can come up with a better plan. Splitting precincts does create a problem. Creating a larger divergence in population creates problems. I mean, everything you do here, if you adjust one factor, the other factors move. So I think giving a little more time was a wise thing to do. And hopefully it all works out. If anybody has any questions on things on a matter of law, I'd be glad to discuss it with them. Anybody on this commission is free to contact me and ask questions. I won't give you advice on how to draw your plan. I'll give you advice on the law. So,
Thank you, Mr. Creasha.
Mr. Chairman,
Go ahead.
was that ability to talk to the attorney previous to this date?
yes, of course. I'm the attorney for
And
the
did-
commission.
and did anybody call you?
Well, I will say yes. I did talk to, but one thing I discussed was there was an issue regarding whether precinct split should be in the analysis, and I said yes because the statute specifically provides for it.
The statute or the court decision?
The statute. The statute provides for precincts. The court decision doesn't mention precincts. It mentions splitting communities. And the case you cited was primarily on the 11.9% standard, which was adopted by the United States Supreme Court in the Abbott case. And there was an issue with how that 11.9% was applied. And I noticed the last time it came up, there was an issue with the court decisions on that. And I had discussions with staff on that. With regard to an individual commission member, I am an attorney, and if, for example, if one of you talks to me about something, there is some type of privilege to that, so I may not be privy to discuss things.
No, and I'm not
But-
suggesting anything to the contrary. I'm just saying that people had the ability, if they chose to do so, to talk to you ahead of time to get the advice, as opposed to submitting a map and not having that advice.
Well,
So that ability to talk with you occurred before our necessity per the commission's date to turn in these maps.
Yeah, but I
Right.
think the point is that both maps meet the basic legal requirements. The question is, can they be better? Looking at one map emphasize different characteristics, another map, than the other map. So, and with regard to our office, as you were a county commissioner, I think everybody knows that we're the attorneys for the county, and anybody can contact us, as we say all the time. Anybody that's on this board is technically a county official at this point. And as far as I've been advised by Corporation Counsel, I will be representing this board, so.
Thank you.
free to
Thank
contact
you,
me.
Mr. Creasy. I'd like a motion to adjourn.
So moved, Rocca.
Rocca, second by Lucido? Yep. All in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Any against? Thank you, board. Meeting's adjourned at 10:01.